Fascinating, intriguing, endless curiosities, engineering solutions, and impending excitement. The 2026 Formula One season is almost here, and after 6 days of testing in Bahrain, a group shakedown in Barcelona, and a whole load of filming days at all sorts of different locations, the new era of Grand Prix car has finally been revealed. These new Formula One cars are packed with endless details, which continue to evolve as the teams start to understand the new rules and the new cars in what is the biggest upheaval in the history of the sport. But before we go racing, I thought I'd look back at the most intriguing and most interesting design features of these new machines, and all of the things which have caught my eye in pre-season testing. We've seen upside down wings, slotted floor, sticky uppy bits, sticky outy bits, and even sticky inny bits. So here are my top technical testing highlights. Ferrari's race start trick. Now, you may have seen a bit of an earlier episode of Tech Talk where Ferrari's ability to get its turbo spun up and battery in the right charge state ahead of a race start perhaps looked a bit longer than it really was in practice. However, as they say, practice makes perfect, and Ferrari does seem to have perfected something in terms of its race starts. Have a look at this mock race start from the penultimate day of pre-season testing, and keep an eye on the Ferrari-powered cars, especially Haas and Ferrari themselves. Look at the way the two Ferrari-powered cars accelerate compared to everybody else. They have massively better acceleration, though I'm not really sure what was going on with the Cadillac, which of course also has the Ferrari power unit. Ferrari is said to have designed its turbocharger layout and indeed the whole power unit with the start phase in mind, and rivals have clearly not done the same thing, and this seems to give cars using the Italian power unit a clear advantage off the start line. Aston Martin's rear suspension. It's fair to say that Adrian Newey's first Aston Martin design has not had the best pre-season testing period. The AMR26 has struggled to show its potential, and the value of some of the fascinating design elements it features are, well, debatable right now. And the one that really jumped out at me was the inboard mounting position of the upper rear wishbone, specifically the rear leg of it, which is mounted incredibly high and also a long way rearward on the car. So far rearward, in fact, that it actually picks up on the rear wing support and not the gearbox casing as would be normal. Perhaps it's another Newey innovation, but with the car's wider struggles, it's hard to really know how good this is, or indeed isn't. Audi's floor. Audi essentially turned up in Bahrain with a completely new version of its first ever Formula One car, the R26. It featured dramatically reshaped side pods with new 2022 Mercedes-style inlet ducts. But the real trick to it, I feel, was actually the reshaped floor entry at the base of those new side pods, which to my eye look bigger than those seen on other cars. And this will be something that's probably a little bit tricky for other teams to replicate, if indeed they want to. But Audi's floor innovation was not limited to the relatively obvious floor entry channels. The Audi mechanics were extremely keen for us not to look at what's called the T-tray area of the car. In other words, the leading edge of the floor underneath the nose. On a lot of cars, teams have some really interesting devices in this area, but Audi alone has a slotted floor, after it noticed a detail in the regulations seemingly missed by everybody else, which essentially allowed it to have holes in the floor. It's clever stuff, but does it work? Well, we'll have to wait and see, not just the performance of the Audi overall in race conditions, but also if any rival teams copy it. And I'm sure some of those rival teams are already mucking about with this idea in the wind tunnel after seeing it on the R26. Ferrari active aerodynamics. The inclusion of this in this video is pretty obvious, but if you think this is the last rear wing innovation in this video, well, you'd be wrong. Ferrari has always got something interesting on its cars, hasn't it? And they didn't disappoint in Bahrain. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed all was not normal with the rear wing on the penultimate day of testing. Now, I've heard rumours of at least one other team preparing to try an active aero solution like this, but often a lot of teams will see something innovative and claim to have tried it themselves in the wind tunnel or in CFD and rejected it. But in reality, I think a lot of teams will be looking at how to get the actuators and linkages for this Ferrari solution mounted into the rear wing end plates, which I think must be some really beautiful engineering from Ferrari on their own end plate with this new, I guess, rotaty wing or rotisserie wing? I don't know what we call it. What do you think? Another really interesting area of the Ferrari that a lot of people have commented on, and it is well worth looking at, is the plate that's appeared behind the exhaust tailpipe. Now again, its exact purposes, well, that would require a wind tunnel and some CFD, but you can get a little hint of what's going on when you look at the plume of vapour that comes out of the oil system breather pipe and how it's being pulled almost vertically upwards, suggesting there's a bit more aerodynamic influence going on with that plate, and it's a pretty powerful tool. And also, as I understand it, very, very difficult for anybody not using the Ferrari gearbox to copy, because it's related to the position of the differential in the gearbox casing, how that extra plate is made legal within the aerodynamic regulations. Really clever bit of lateral thinking there from the engineers at Maranello. Alpine cooling. As pre-season testing progressed, one thing became very clear, just how different the cooling levels on the different cars were. And the Mercedes-powered cars in particular had very small cooling outlets. The most extreme example of this was the Alpine, which seems to have no central cooling exit at all, or indeed a very, very small one, and instead just has some thin slits on the engine cover, as well as some louvered panels on the top of the side pods. And these louvered panels were interchangeable, and the team ran a number of different versions in testing, some very, very small indeed, and some quite large. But overall, the rear of the car was just incredibly free of cooling outlets. This could offer Alpine a notable drag reduction compared to cars like the Aston Martin, for example, which seemingly has to run very open and visually very draggy bodywork. Mercedes and others front wings. The 2026 technical regulations allow for the front wing elements to be movable for the first time since 2009 as part of the active aerodynamics system, and the rules allow for the two rearmost elements of the front wing to be adjustable. But some teams like Mercedes have only opted to move the rearmost element of the wing and instead mount the nose to the middle element of the wing rather than the leading edge of the wing, which is more popular up and down the pit lane. It's entirely allowed to do this, and some teams like Mercedes and Aston Martin have opted for, I guess for aerodynamic reasons, to just move the rearmost element, but it's still not clear what the best solution is. Where's my brake ducts? One emerging trend in the 2026 season is a lack of brake ducts, or rather a lack of air scoops used to cool the brakes. Typically, a car will feature a large scoop like these seen on the Audi on the inner edge of the front wheels to feed cooling air to the brake discs, the pads and the calipers. However, Williams, Ferrari and Mercedes, well, they seem to forget the air scoops altogether, and they rely purely on the gap between the front tyre and the inner plate on the wheel to provide cooling airflow to the brakes. It's not that they haven't got any air scoops or air inlets at all for the front brakes. They do, they're just located in that split between the tyre and that aerodynamic plate on the inner edge of the wheel. And actually, there's still a huge amount of clever ducting internally on these layouts, as you can just about see here on a picture I took of the Williams. Williams' sticky uppy bit. The regulations provide quite a lot of freedom in the area of the front of the floor, known previously as the bargeboard area, sort of. There's 11 cars and 11 entirely different solutions on this part of the car, and it's going to feature a lot in Tech Talk this season, I suspect, because some of the designs are already incredibly complex. But Williams alone has exploited an area of freedom to have a rather large monolith, or sticky uppy bit, on the inner edge of this plate. I think it's an area that other teams will work very hard to exploit after seeing the Williams solution. Rodent holes. Now, I think some F1 teams may need to call pest control, as it appears their wind tunnels have something of an infestation of mice, at least if the name mouse hole is anything to go by, and the size of those holes in the sides of the diffusers is pretty big as well. That would be some big mice. A lot of teams have large openings on the walls of the diffusers, which have been nicknamed mouse holes by some. These holes, I think, are being used to seal the edge of the diffuser from the messy airflow spilling off the base of the rear tyre, so-called tyre squirt, and that can boost the overall downforce level of the car by making the diffuser a bit more effective. But without some CFD or a wind tunnel, that's really just a guess, and anyone who says stuff like this without data from a wind tunnel or CFD is indeed essentially guessing or just making it up. And the rear floor. Ahead of the rear wheels of the car, there is another zone of freedom where the floors have a range of holes, splits, slits and serrations, and one of the most extreme versions of this can be seen on the Alpine, which has a double-deck section in this area, and perhaps that's a sign of the team's very large wind tunnel and CFD allocation. Either way, these double-deck rear floor sections are becoming more popular down the pit lane, but Alpine still remains having the most advanced version for now. And finally, the Mercedes rear wing. Mercedes has been rather quietly getting on with its pre-season test program in the garage and out on track, while I think it's probably fair to say that things have been a little bit less quiet for Mercedes in the paddock and back at base. A big upgrade package on the car though was largely overlooked in the second test, but on the very final day of the test, the team introduced a new rear wing with new end plates and these fascinating little extensions on the upper edge of the wing. This is sure to be generating a lot of interest from the team's rivals, and at first I thought these might be just sensor housings, but a closer look suggests that they are indeed aerodynamic parts, and that's fascinating, and I wonder if they took inspiration from an early long-tail Porsche 917. No, the flaps aren't individually movable, but still, this is a really interesting area to keep an eye on. That very last burst of innovation was not the last in the pit lane in testing, and in this video I haven't even gone close to detailing every single interesting bit of every single car, well, because we'd be here until December 2026. Well, we will be here until December 2026, and that's because this is not the last we will see this year. In fact, there's so many innovations on display in F1 this season already that I'm utterly thrilled to see what's going to be coming up in Tech Talk once the season gets going, because it's going to be utterly thrilling.